This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
You're listening to Building the Broncos with Nick Kendell and Carl Dumler, Broncos country's leading draft and scouting analysts. Get on over to milehighhuddle.com to sound off on all things Broncos.
Hello there, Broncos country, and it is once again time for another episode of Building the Broncos. I am your host, Carl Dumler, and with me, as always, I have my co-host and good friend, Mr. Nick Kendell, and today we are joined by special guest, Mr. Benjamin Allbright. Gentlemen, how's it going?
That's going pretty well. How about yourselves?
I'm doing okay. We're getting an ice storm here, so praying that the power doesn't go out. But other than that, you have to give the weekly weather update. I've been living through this polar vortex here in the Midwest, so listeners have been depending on it. But getting excited, ready for the offseason to get into full swing. Kind of irritated the Patriots won once again, but, that's death taxes and the Patriots winning the Super Bowl. It seems like what it's turning into, so can't complain too much.
I was going to say, it looked like the security guards were even bored at the parade. They were trying to kick field goals today, so it's just kind of a common expectancy, but hopefully not for much more in the future. But no, things are good here, and very, very excited to get to talk to you here, Ben. And we want to make sure that all of our Twitter followers know to follow me at Carl Dumler MHH and Nick at Nick Kendell MHH. And, of course, Benjamin Allbright at Allbright NFL. You can follow the podcast Twitter account at Huddle Up Pod, and make sure you subscribe to our show and leave us a rating as we value your input on our show. You can find the show on iTunes, Stitcher, and even that of YouTube. Also, make sure you head over to Mile High Huddle, an affiliate of 24/7 Sports and the CBS Sports Digital, to find ours and our co-writers' articles and all things pertain to your Denver Broncos. This podcast is powered by Overtime Media. Like I said, we're excited to welcome in Benjamin Allbright, truly one of my favorite follows on Twitter. You can find him again at Allbright NFL. The man is consistently ahead of the media when breaking stories, to the point he breaks it so early that others forget Allbright said it weeks earlier. And many try to take credit on you, buddy, but we know better here.
I appreciate it. It's always a source of some contention.
I'm sure. I would be pretty upset on some of that. But I'm trying to even think. You broke the Drew Lock to the Broncos how long ago?
We were talking about that. It was early December.
That's what I thought.
The first I saw anybody else mention it would have been Woody Page, and that was the second week of January. So I guess about 6 weeks ahead of that.
And I definitely remember seeing a tweet December 24th saying, Bronco fans, you guys need to get acquainted with Drew Lock. So that's one that really sticks out. I remember Christmas Eve. I'm like, okay, well, there it is.
Yeah, that's your early Christmas present.
Yeah, well, we'll see if it plays out, and we'll see how that turns out, too.
We appreciate it. And so seriously, people, go follow this guy. You will become a smarter football fan for doing so. And like I said, you'll get information way before anybody else. So, Ben, let's start right there, the quarterback position. And I know everybody wants to talk about the draft, but let's talk about free agency here a little bit, because there's been some, I'd say, differing opinions on whether the Broncos are going to stick with Case Keenum as their big veteran quarterback, if they're going to try to trade him, move on to a guy like Joe Flacco. What are the odds that Case Keenum is with the Broncos in 2019?
I would say very high. I would suggest that Case Keenum is the plan. I know everybody's been talking about Joe Flacco, which I would think is the backup plan, Nick Foles, which is not in the cards at all, and Sean Mannion, which is so funny I don't even know who to say. That's the most ludicrous thing I've ever heard in my life. Sean Mannion was nearly cut this preseason for Luis Perez. The only reason they hung on to him was because he had a year's more experience and they could put Perez on the practice squad and then bring him back this next year. So, I don't understand why there's suddenly this narrative that the Broncos are going after Sean Mannion, a guy that the Rams think so highly of, they don't even want him as their backup.
You got to love the Sean McVay effect, I guess, in the NFL right now. It's getting – I don't know what's the word I'm looking for. Ridiculous. I mean, but there's other words out there. It's just getting crazy how much anything that's connected to Sean McVay, if you've ever even whispered his name, all of a sudden you have an NFL job.
Well, everybody but me, apparently. Sean and I worked together for a year in Tampa, and I'm still waiting on my employment contract.
Well, good things will come. We just need to put that out there a little more.
Fair enough.
You had mentioned Nick Foles there. I guess what's all going on there with him? I know there's some reports that the Eagles were going to sign him, maybe even franchise tag him. What's all going on with his possible path to free agency or a trade?
I think in the end, what they're going to do is make it so that Nick has to pay the $2 million buyout to get out. I think that's the way it's going to end up. They're experimenting with a couple of different things. It's really more about the Eagles trying to see what they can get in terms of compensation. The problem is that most teams aren't willing to give things up for Nick Foles. And this is something I tried to caution people on last year when people talking about 2 first-rounders for Nick Foles and all this other stuff, is that teams don't view Nick Foles the same way fans view Nick Foles. Fans see a guy who, made a couple little playoff runs and think very highly of him. Teams don't think that highly of Nick Foles. He's not ever succeeded in the NFL outside of kind of the Andy Reid system in Philadelphia there. He did have a season with Chip Kelly before everybody got tape on Chip Kelly where, he kind of put up some numbers, but you go back and look at the tape and he should have had about, 15 or 16 interceptions that season. He finished with 2. He just had an incredibly lucky season with people dropping interceptions. So Nick Foles is a pedestrian quarterback. Nick Foles was on the Rams. Nick Foles played so poorly, he was benched for Case Keenum, who outplayed him. So, to give you an idea of what it is that people are clamoring for, I would suggest that, Case, you can win with Case Keenum. We've seen a team do it. We saw the Vikings go to the NFC Championship with him. You just need an offensive coordinator who's willing to play to his strengths. And, they didn't have that last year. Bill Musgrave doesn't use play action. He likes to throw vertically down the seams. That's kind of been the hallmark of his offense forever. And Case, those are the things he's worst at. He's the number 5 quarterback in the NFL last year off of play action, number 2 over the last 3 years. And they just, they didn't play to his strength. So Nick Foles is not in the plans for Denver, to make a short story long. He's not the guy they're looking at. They're not targeting him. If they somehow wind up with Nick Foles, that would mean Case Keenum got into a life-threatening car wreck and all the other quarterbacks decided to turn them down.
Well, there you go, yikes. Bronco fans. Yeah, wow. Where do you think Nick Foles ends up?
I think it's going to be Jacksonville. I know everybody's kind of connecting the dots there with John DeFilippo, but I just think that based on the money and based on the need and based on the relationship, and it's important to remember this is a relationship league. It isn't like Madden where it just looks like a good fit, so you do it. It's a relationship-based league, and I think that it really is going to wind up being a thing where they're going to look at their options and find out that that's probably the best way for them to go.
Yeah, very good information there. I guess then let's switch to another free agent quarterback and maybe the guy that other teams will look at a little bit harder. What do teams think about Teddy Bridgewater?
Well, there's some interest around the league there. It's just kind of tough to gauge because people don't know, is he going to return to form? That game he came in wasn't all that great. Is Teddy best suited staying in New Orleans and trying to compete with Taysom Hill to be the eventual successor to Drew Brees? There's questions about who he can become or who he is going to be once he does get a starting gig. There was some talk about possibly the Giants bringing him in as an insurance policy if they don't go the Haskins route this year. To push Eli and then look at quarterbacks again the following year. So there's a couple of options out there. I think he'll wind up competing for a job somewhere, but I would suggest that interest around the league with him is also not as high as maybe it is with the fans.
Is there any free agent quarterback that's going to hit the market that you think teams are actually going to be clamoring to get?
Ryan Tannehill. I think he's going to wind up in Cincinnati, but if he does, that would push Dalton out there. Dalton would be the guy who I think would probably wind up in Washington. Blake Bortles is going to get a little bit of interest here or there, but mainly as a number 2 guy. Joe Flacco is going to get a little bit of interest as well as kind of a stopgap. But Ryan Tannehill is really the guy. If he could stay healthy, his numbers when he's healthy are phenomenal. It's the problem is he just can't stay healthy. He's always hurt. So, his medical is going to be a big thing with him, and there's going to be a bigger market for Tannehill than people think.
Interesting.
So if Jacksonville signs any of these guys, of Bridgewater, Foles, Tannehill, does any of those quarterbacks take them out of quarterback in the first round?
I don't think Jacksonville's going to be in the market for a quarterback in the first round. I think they're going to continue to supplement some of those defensive positions with younger guys and get some of those high dollar contracts out of there. Malik and Darius are eating up too much money for them. I think that they're going to look interior line. I think that there's just a good draft for that. I think that's what they're going to do is try to turn that over and get younger there and get cheaper there where they can allocate money elsewhere.
Okay. All right. Well, then let's turn to the draft here. And let's look at some of these top guys here. The three top guys that pretty much everybody has on their boards right now: Drew Lock, Dwayne Haskins, Kyler Murray. And let's just start with Drew Lock because, that's obviously the big name for the Broncos. Pretty much every mock draft out there has the Broncos taking this guy, moving up possibly to get him. What do you like about his game?
Well, he'll remind you of Jay Cutler, but in the good way. And when I say that name, people instantly shudder and they're like, oh no. But, it reminds you of Jay Cutler in the good way. Jay's personality turned a lot of people off, but Jay was an exciting, strong-arm quarterback. Drew has those things. The difference is Drew's personality is almost a polar opposite from Cutler. He's not standoffish. He's not arrogant. He's not aloof. When we were down in Mobile at the Senior Bowl doing interviews with him, he lit the room up. You knew he was that guy. You walk into a room and, you're looking around, you're like, who's the top dog in this room? He was that guy. And so, I think that he's a guy that does need some mechanical cleanup. The small hands are a little concerning, but they certainly didn't take away from any power. He threw the ball with power just fine. If you go back and look at the tape, he makes too many throws off his back foot. But he's a guy who's got the arm to do it. And so if you can refine him a little bit, you kind of get yourself one of these newfangled quarterbacks that can move around. They've got athleticism and can move around. He's got different throwing platforms, and he's got the arm strength to muscle it in there. And, the guy that describes, or the person that I'm describing right now, is kind of Pat Mahomes. And that's really the future of the point guard, the quarterback position in the NFL. And it's funny that I said point guard.
I know, I was going to say that fits pretty well, actually.
It is. Yeah, it's really what it is. Like, Pat Mahomes is not a quarterback; he's a point guard. He's playing basketball on grass, and and that's the thing. Like, I think that people are starting to realize that that's the evolution of offense in the NFL, and you got to find guys who can execute like that. Finding a big, tall, drop back guy is just a moot point anymore, because defenses get there so fast. Having that wide base like that and not being able to manipulate the pocket quickly and reset and get the ball out, is one of the more valuable traits. So the quarterback position is getting smaller on purpose.
We saw that in the Super Bowl as well. A guy that seemed to struggle out of structure a little bit, resetting his base to make him off script plays. Jared Goff, a great quarterback, but didn't show that so much in college. And Bill Belichick, tip of the cap to him, and Brian Flores, they kept him in the pocket and they got after him with good stunts and pressures like that. But once you ask him to get a little bit off script, it kind of crumbled on him.
Right. And that's the thing. You've got to be able to do both. You've got to be able to thrive in structure, but then when the play breaks down, you've got to be able to, to make plays with your legs. And, the Patriots did a great job. They did what we call isoing the defensive line. They made it look like they were sending 5 every time. So each lineman had to take one guy, and then they would only bring 4. And so one guy was left doing nothing, and you had guys dropping back into zones that created confusion. It was really a great game plan.
Yeah, isolating those guys one-on-ones is definitely great, and hopefully something we'll see here with Denver with Fangio coming up. But yeah, Drew Lock, you're talking about a guy who can win in structure and out of structure, and his numbers when the pocket was clean and he had time, and he looked pretty good. I saw Pro Football Focus. He had really high numbers when not pressure, but under pressure, he kind of gets a little bit chaotic. But I don't think that means that he can't play out of structure. There's some plays, the Senior Bowl, like how much does that actually mean? But that little underhand pass on the move, he's doing things with his leg in the bowl game as well. He's making plays out of structure on 3rd and long, making some NFL throws. Let's be serious. Is that something that would gravitate you to Lock, or you think that the inconsistencies are so present that it's just too much of a risk?
Well, I think everybody's going to have inconsistencies. I think the key is you put his 20 best throws on tape and you tag it to your quarterback coach and you say, okay, now make him do that every play. And that's why you hire a coach to begin with. And so you're asking yourself is, his 20 best throws and his 20 worst throws, which of these is he? Which of these is him? And so, when you figure that out, he's either your guy or he's not. And so, I think he's a guy that you can clean up a little bit mechanically and you can turn him into something. I would not have him as a day one starter. And I think that the Broncos have a perfect scenario where you've got a guy like Case Keenum who could step in and be the day one starter while Drew gets ready, similar to the Alex Smith and Pat Mahomes situation. He's a competent starter. You're building a young offense, a young, exciting offense around him, whether that was, Tyreek Hill and Watkins and Kareem Hunt, who's gone now, obviously, Travis Kelce, or whether that's Cortland Sutton, Deshaun Hamilton, Tim Patrick, Philip Lindsay, et cetera, et cetera. You build the young offense around him, and then you plug and play that quarterback when he's ready. Because, 75% of quarterbacking isn't throwing the football. It's being able to read the fields, being able to make protection calls, being able to diagnose, being able to understand, conceptually what's going on in the play, understand conceptually what's happening in the defense, and getting the nonverbals, the communication down, all these other things. And so having a year to season yourself and be able to do those things without the pressure of having to deal with NFL defenses, I think is vital.
So now the question, I guess, really should be, do you think the Denver Bronco fan base is patient enough to wait another year for a rookie quarterback to not play right away? Because that narrative of, they don't get better on the bench is rampant throughout Broncos country right now.
Yeah, and it's a wrong narrative.
Yes.
You look around the league right now at all the quarterbacks that are stars in the league. They all sat for a little while, whether it's Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers, Drew Brees, Phillip Rivers, Pat Mahomes. I can go on and on all day. The vast majority of them did sit. You find guys occasionally that have that star quality that, you start day one, whether that's, Peyton Manning, although he struggled in his first year, Baker Mayfield, who, helped turn the Browns around, although he sat a few games, and though he shouldn't have. That kind of thing. So it's difficult sometimes to parse the difference. And I would say that Broncos fans need to understand that, the offense that they've built here actually looks like it's going to be something special. If you could give it just one more year, you've got 3 phenomenal receivers, I think, that are going to be great. I think Tim Patrick is going to be a stud. I think people are underestimating him because he's in the shadow of Cortland Sutton. Deshaun Hamilton is going to be a great slot receiver. He's going to remind people of somewhere between Davon Bess and Jarvis Landry. He just finds a soft spot in zone and makes the catch. Once they get an explosive tight end, to put in that package, and I don't think that's Butter Hireman. I think they're guys. I think they're guys that can make a roster, but I think they're just guys. And add that to Royce Freeman and especially Philip Lindsay. You've got an explosive offense pre-made. Now all you need to do is get your trigger man in there, and you're good to go.
And the secret ingredient, Mike Munchak.
Well, that was the hire of the offseason, honestly.
Yes.
Everybody's talking about Fangio and this, that, and the other, and I'm a little cautious about that because the track record for, head coaches that get their first job at 60 years old or older is actually abysmally poor. Only one of them even has a winning record. That's Bruce Arians. The rest of them, when you combine their records together, have a 24% winning percentage, which makes Vance Joseph look like Bill Belichick by comparison. So, I'm a little cautious about that. The most comparable example we have is Dick LeBeau maybe taking over up there in Cincinnati as head coach, and that's not really a good thing. But it looks like they've done better with the offensive coaches, with Angarello and Munchak especially, who I think was the hire of the offseason.
Yeah, it's almost comparable to me, the bringing over Bill Collar for the defensive line. I mean, just it could totally revolutionize that side of the ball. And I mean, you see what Skarnecki did for Tom Brady and the New England Patriots. I mean, he's the unsung hero of their dynasty, and how good Big Ben was underneath, when Mike Munchak was the offensive line coach there, and talking about how good Drew Lock can be when he's kept clean. I think that secret ingredient, Mike Munchak, I agree with you. I think that is the get of the offseason.
Right. And, Mike has a long history of getting the most out of offensive linemen. And so if anybody's going to turn Garrett Bowles into what they thought he could be when they drafted him, it's got to be Mike Munchak. And we'll find out if, Garrett Bowles takes that next step and becomes the superstar they thought he could be, or if he's going to, kind of continue to bounce around the league and be known as Garrett Holds, as coaches refer to him in the offseason.
Oh, boy.
Not a good name.
And yeah, not quite the name we were hoping for. But like I said, maybe that name could change. That's the great thing about the NFL is there's always next year, and we'll see if that happens. But what do you think about Drew Lock's fit with Scangarello?
Well, and in fairness, I've known Rick dating back to when he was at Millsaps in Mississippi. I think Rick he's a good fit for that. Rick will work with what he's given. He'll take the quarterback and he'll get the most out of what he can do. And he's always been that guy. Everybody talks about Nick Mullins, but the real crowning achievement, the real pinnacle achievement of Scangarello's career is back when he was at UC Davis in the late 90s. And he had this unknown kid named JT O'Sullivan and who later, caught on for a couple of years in the league. And while he wasn't a superstar in the league, Rick turned him into something. That's, I think, the key to what people need to do is go back and look at what O'Sullivan briefly was in the league, which was quite good when he got to play. But, I think that's the thing is Rick has a history of finding talent, finding guys that other people overlooked and squeezing the juice out of them. He's getting juice from a stone, as they call it. So I think that he's the right fit. I think he's the right hire, and I think that Locke fits in well. But more than that, I think Scangarello will do what Locke can do. That's
key. Good coaches put their own players in situations that make them better. So that's good to hear.
Well, that's coaching. Coaching is taking a guy and finding out what his strengths and weaknesses are and playing to his strengths.
Yep. I mean, so you're not a big fan of Musgrave is what I'm taking from this.
My mom said, my mother always told me if you didn't have anything nice to say about somebody, don't say anything. So I'm not even sure what name you just repeated. Let's put that.
Yeah. All right. Well, moving on here with other draft quarterbacks. Dwayne Haskins, he seems to be the top guy among most of media and draft media people. What are your thoughts here on Dwayne Haskins and what he could bring to the NFL?
Well, Haskins, I've seen some scouting reports out there that looked a little bizarre, talking about his mobility. Dwayne is not a mobile guy.
No.
In fact, Drew Lock has more mobility than Dwayne Haskins. But Haskins does have a pretty good arm. The ball does die on him a little bit deeper. Locke's got a bigger arm. Haskins is just more refined as a passer. He's got better touch in the intermediate game. He's a little more accurate, a little more anticipatory. He's been working with Quincy Acey, refining his game. I think Haskins, I'm trying to think of somebody he reminds me of. If I had to put a comparison on Drew Lock, I would say that it's Derek Carr as a prospect. Now, Carr's had some good years, had some bad years, but, that's who he reminds me of tools-wise. And trying to find somebody that really, that fits Haskins, I think it's more of Kirk Cousins. Is really kind of who I'd compare him to. I get irritated at people that that start saying he's mobile and stuff because he's not. But he does have good intermediate touch. He'll get himself in trouble with the deep ball, and he'll throw a pick or two that he shouldn't because he doesn't have the arm that he thinks he does. But overall, he's a safe quarterback, and if you got a strong defense and run game, he can win you football games.
Something that a friend of the pod, John Ledyard, had brought up is, especially comparing Drew Lock to Dwayne Haskins, and Joe Goodberry last week when he was on the pod, the risk aversion of Haskins compared to the gunslinger mentality of Lock. Do you see a guy who's maybe risk averse to a fault when it comes to Haskins tape, like he's leaving stuff on the field, almost that not Alex Smith syndrome, but that kind of thing where there's plays down the field that he should be trying to hit that he just isn't pulling the trigger on?
There's some of that. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think his coaches, kind of kept him playing within himself because they knew that, they could be successful that way. I think if he tries to start uncorking it in the league, he's going to be in trouble. Haskins doesn't have an elite arm. So,
yeah.
I don't want to see him trying to Pat Mahomes his way down the field,
Yeah.
I'm always reminded of that scene from, what's that movie? Hitch, where Kevin James starts doing the crazy dancing, and Will Smith smacks him on the face a couple times, says no, and gives him the elbow thing, and like, this is your move right here. You're here between 10 and 2. This is your home, and that's what a coach needs to do to Dwayne Haskins. This is your home right here. I don't need you trying to throw YOLO balls all over the field. I need you to hit the guy in between 11 and 20 yards, and that's your home right there.
For sure. Now, speaking about some YOLO balls, got to talk about the Heisman winner, the guy, the maybe baseball player, maybe football player, Kyler Murray, not Patrick Mahomes, Kyler Murray. And curious, gun to your head right now. Now, I'm not asking for breaking news, but if you had a gut feeling, is it going to be football or baseball, or do you just want to abstain from that one?
I think he's going to go baseball.
Baseball.
I think he is. Talking to everybody down in Mobile that I talked to, the league is significantly lower on him than the fans of media are. There were a couple teams that were kind of talking positively about him, but most teams said the same thing. It's funny to me because it's the same comments they used to say about Johnny Manziel. Said, yeah, he'll probably go in the first round, but it won't be us taking him. And when everybody starts to say that, that means, well, we're hearing, through media that people like him, but the reality is we don't. And so, it's tough to. If you're a general manager in the NFL, you're only going to get one shot at that most likely. And it's tough as a general manager. Are you going to be the guy who pushes all his chips to the table on a guy who's 5'9", 185 pounds, is basically the size of Cole Beasley. It has other options. It may not even sign with you. If you burn a first-round draft pick on it, may not even sign with you, may go to baseball. As a general manager, that could set your team back forever. So, I don't know that it's going to be tough for general managers to do that. And, the unique part of this is that the lower he slips, the worse it gets for Murray. It's not more likely that somebody would take a shot. It's less likely because once you hit about pick 20, the money from baseball and football evens out. And so now, with the first 20 picks in football, you have the advantage as a general manager saying, well, we've got more money for you. Now you don't have that advantage. So are you burning a late first or an early second on a guy who may not even sign with you and you don't get to recoup the pick?
Might as well just throw the pick away.
Yeah, exactly. Switching a little bit just to his game on the field, where would you rank him in this class if you were just on football skills alone, not taking into account the MLB thing and all the bad interviews and things like that, just play on the field? Where would you rank him?
Oh, man, that's so tough. He would probably be QB4 for me in this class. I think Daniel Jones has more upside. Daniel Jones is further from being ready than Kyler Murray. You can drop Kyler out there pretty early, but Jones is further from being ready. But I think Jones has more upside in the end, plus that size. I mean, I'm just not dropping a guy the size that – I'm not dropping a guy that's smaller than me, to be honest. I'm 5'10", 180 pounds. I was a 4'6", 40 guy. And so, I understand Murray probably, more athletic than I was, but I'm not, being fast and being a quarterback is fun until you get caught. And then it's not, and I can personally attest to that. And so it's one of those things where, I look at him and you got to rank everybody and all this kind of stuff. But in the end, the question really is would I take this guy or not? So, and if I wouldn't, what's the point of even ranking him, where I'm going to put him, because he's not a guy I'm going to take. Just based on those things. He's 5'9", and he weighs 35 pounds less than Russell Wilson and Baker Mayfield. I mean, and we were talking about Baker being too small. So, I want to audibly interject that "what is you doing" meme right here.
Yeah. Did you watch his Dan Patrick interview?
Yeah, I did, and that was bizarre.
It was obviously one of the worst.
He was trying to hedge what he was saying. I mean, he knows that he's trying to play both sides here and figure out what his options are and all that. But if you're going to go rep a company and do public interviews like that, you got to have better answers than I don't know.
Yeah. Well, especially, there was no commitment to the combine, no commitment to a pro day. There's just, how are teams supposed to get to know this kid at all?
Well, right. And that's kind of the thing is, they're going to get to know him. And, there's some things about his extended family. His father's kind of a helicopter dad. His dad was actually sued by the Milwaukee Brewers for breach of contract, for backing out of a deal once, and that kind of stuff. There's some other things going on there that teams are less enamored with that the media and the fans don't really know about.
Is the Lamar Ball bad?
I'm not going to say it's that bad.
Okay.
But it's not good. One thing they do that the NFL teams do not like is helicopter parents, and that's one of the reasons you're going to see up there in Michigan, Shea Patterson next year go a lot lower than probably he should, is because his dad is entirely too close to the process, and teams just really don't like that.
Too many cooks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, is there any other quarterbacks? I know you mentioned Daniel Jones, but any mid-round guys that you could think the Broncos might be interested in or Bronco fans should be watching right now?
Well, Easton Stick, he didn't really have a really good shrine game, but we could practice there. But he's a guy that, if you're looking for a developmental guy, he's a guy could be in that mold. I thought Ryan Finley looked all right down there at the Senior Bowl. The guy that surprised me the most, I think, was probably Jarrett Stidham out of Auburn. Go back and look at his tape, and it doesn't look like much. But you got into practice, and he was a guy who commanded the huddle well. He got guys to play for him, and he looked pretty accurate down there. Ball flew off his hand. So, those are some names to keep your eye on.
Where do you think Stidham will end? I know we're still a ways out, but if you had a gun to your head, I've heard people saying, round 4, and then I've seen some people saying top of the second round. Where do you think Stidham would end up going if the draft was today?
Day 3, early day 3.
You
might see him slip into the third round, but he's probably one of those guys that gets taken the first 10 picks of the fourth round. There's not too many day 2 quarterbacks in this class. Clayton Thorson and Will Grier are probably the guys that go in the third round, maybe sneak into the second.
For sure. And then, I saw you talking on Twitter the other day about the 2020 class. We don't need to obviously break down each guy. We got a whole another year of film, but what are your thoughts? Some people are really hedging their bets on, this isn't a good quarterback class. Maybe we got to tank for Tua next year or go after Jake Fromm. And I saw you heavily going against that narrative. I'm curious about your overall thoughts on that, though.
Well, that's what teams don't look at that like that. They just don't do that. Either you have your guy or you don't have your guy. Either there's a guy in this class. You don't just draft a guy and then turn around and draft a guy the next year. You're making a 3-year investment if you draft a guy. So the idea that that you would draft a Kyler Murray and that if he flames out, you just draft Jake Fromm the next year. That's not that's not something teams do. So, next year's class, there's some guys in there from. I'm not a big Tua guy. He reminds me way too much of Tebow, and he's got just a long release. Yeah. I don't. Pro Tua is not something I'm really on the train for. But Herbert, Fromm, there's some guys in that class that look pretty good. But I think when it shakes out, everybody talking about it being a stacked class. I think this class we had last year is actually going to be the crown jewel class of the next 10 years or so.
Well, that's interesting to hear. I'm going to throw out some other names for you. You tell me yay or nay, or just little thoughts on him. Jacob Eason over at Washington now, and Chris Peterson. He's an interesting one.
Yeah, he's a yay.
He's a yay. Nathan Stanley.
Also a yay with an asterisk.
Brian Lewerke.
No, that's a nay.
Ellinger down in Texas.
Undecided. I see flashes there, but I haven't. He's not a guy that I've really kind of done one way or the other. I see flashes and then I see groans.
For sure. And then another guy kind of under the radar, probably not so under the radar to you, but most people, Love down at Utah State. He's really flashed when I've watched him.
I like him a lot. That's your sleeper for next year. That's a big time sleeper. Keep your eye out there. He's got a future ahead of him if he can stay healthy.
Yeah, he was a lot of fun to watch. All right, well, it does like there. I think there's a higher high end, at least more variance at the top of next year's class, but that doesn't mean there's going to be the guy or multiple guys at the top. At least that's what it seems like right now, but a lot can change.
Right. Yeah, that's the thing. I think there's definitely room with some of these guys next year. It's just a question of, who separates themselves and who becomes the guy, All
right. Well, just one final question about the draft here. Beyond the quarterback position, do you see the Broncos? What other positions do you see the Broncos targeting early in the draft?
Well, they're going to go after an inside linebacker. They really talked quite a bit with Jermaine Pratt out of North Carolina State while they were down in Mobile. He kind of fits the mold. Vic Fangio's defense requires fast, versatile inside linebackers, guys that can come downhill but can also go away from the ball in coverage and side to side. And the Broncos don't have that. Todd Davis is strictly a downhill guy. Josie Jewell's a run funnel guy. You funnel the run to him, he'll make the tackle, but he's not very athletic. And neither one of those guys are guys you want dropping back in coverage, unless you want a heart attack. So, I think that's what they're going to be doing. I think they might make a run at a free agent linebacker. Brandon Marshall won't be back. So they might make a run at a free agent guy. And you could see a guy like Pratt maybe on day 2. I think Dalen Mack out of Texas A&M is a guy they're going to look at as an eventual successor to DAmato Peko. Shelby's a gap penetrator, but he's not much of a brick wall like Peko is. And you really do kind of need that brick wall, zero tech nose for Fangio. So we'll see how that goes, but I think he'll be in the consideration. And then the corners, there's quite a few corners in this draft. I think that's a direction they're going to look at as well. So, you could see them bring in a strong safety like Adrian Amos, but they still need some help at the corners. So I suspect they'll look to that, the draft, the corner help as well.
All right. Well, let's switch gears here just a little bit and get on to I know the coaching staff has been in place here for a little bit, and you talked a little bit about Vic Fangio and the hiring of guys who are 60-plus and not equaling out too well. But what are some things about him that should have Bronco fans excited, and what should have some things worried about that kind of hire? Because it is kind of a Broncos zigged, going old-school coach when everybody else zagged, anyone connected to Sean McVay.
They've got an aggressive, defensive-minded coach who fits the system that they want to run. They want to run that kind of base 34 thing, and I think that he's a guy who can maybe get more out of the defense. I felt like Vance and specifically Joe Woods really didn't get what they could have out of the talent that the Broncos have. They ran entirely too much cover zero. Justin Simmons looks like a premier one high safety, and you had him down in the nickel and man. It was just poor defensive scheming, it looked like. And Vic's a guy who's been around, seen it all kind of thing. And, I think he'll look to maximize the players. There's a bit of concern that Fangio's defenses have kind of fallen off in year 3 or 4. Whether that's turnover to new players, or injuries or just random coincidence, I don't know. But pretty solid history of his defense has taken a nosedive in year 3 or 4. So, that's going to be something to keep your eye on. Overall, I think the hire was good. I think it is important to zig when everybody else zags, because it's a copycat league, and the more people do that one thing that keeps working, the less it works, because people start to figure it out. So if you're going in a different direction, I think that helps. The Patriots have been notorious for that for the last decade and a half, being one step ahead of everybody. Everybody's spreading it out. All of a sudden, they're going 2 tight ends and running power, that kind of thing. So I think the Broncos made a good hire overall. Pulling for Munchak to get the job. He got the O-line job, so I'm happy either way.
Now, the newest guy here, Rick Scangarello, you already kind of talked about him a little bit and what he brings to the plate. I was kind of wondering, what are your thoughts on Scangarello coming from more of that zone blocking scheme under the Shanahans and stuff, and Munchak being more of a power blocking scheme kind of guy? How are they going to make that mesh?
Well, I think that's you get the best of both worlds. I think it makes you scheme versatile. I think you get a coach that coaches that have success either way. I mean, the Steelers ran some split zone at times, especially with Le'Veon Bell. So it's not like Munchak doesn't have experience with zone blocking. He just, they favor power. So I think that, I think overall, you're kind of getting a diversity of opinion in that room. You're getting a diversity of experience. And so, you've got to come in and coach guys the best you can, but it gives you some ideas and some things that you can maybe blend to make you, a better football team. If you have everybody on the same page, it's one thing, but that means you're only good at one thing. And so, I think the diversity of background is going to help and not hurt.
Well, that's really good to hear then. What players do you think are going to benefit most from these new coaches being brought in?
I think Garrett Bowles is going to be one of them, probably Connor McGovern. I don't think Matt Paradis is going to be back, so if Jones gets the center job, that'll be big for him. They like Billy Turner. I think a young offensive lineman, in general. I don't really know that the tight end position is going to – that the young receivers will take a step forward. That'll be good. I think that you're going to see the inside linebacker group get upgraded, and that's really going to help. But I think you're going to see Justin Simmons kind of emerge and become a borderline all-pro as a one-high safety. So I think that's really going to be the key. He's going to get a lot more turnovers because he's going to be in a better position as a ball-hawking safety rather than down there covering a guy in man, covering a receiver in man like he was a lot last year.
Now, you said something there that really caught my attention. You said you don't think Matt Paradis will be back next year?
I don't. They really lowballed him on the contract offer they gave him. He felt insulted by that, and I don't think that he's going to be. There could be a change of heart. There could be a turnaround. But based on everything I'd heard back in December, I'm reasonably confident he won't be back, and he'll get a lot of money on the open market.
Wow. Okay. Are there any other in-house guys that the Broncos are really wanting to bring back?
Well, I mean, they want Wolf to take a little bit of a haircut to come back and sign an extension so he can finish his career as a Bronco, and I think they'll get that worked out. I think everybody knows Brandon Marshall and Darren Stewart are going to be gone. Ron Leary could be gone. That's still kind of up in the air. Emmanuel could be traded. That doesn't necessarily happen, but that's one of those things that's been sniffed around a couple of different ways. And if the Niners are unable to get the Antonio Brown deal done, then Sanders would be their next target, as far as that goes. And that kind of creates a natural trade-up scenario with Denver and San Fran for that, 10-2 and Emmanuel Sanders and other picks. So, keep your eye on that.
Mind blowing. I did not know about the Paradis thing, and I figured, with Scangarello and maybe a little bit more zone and how consistent he's been. I've always been of the mindset that it's important to bring back your own talent to show your locker room that if you do your job, you can be rewarded. But that's some new information, so I'm not quite sure how I feel about that.
Yeah, he's a great guy. I just, he felt a little insulted by that offer, and I get that. I understand that. So. Oh, yeah. That's going to be one of those scenarios where, it bears watching if they can talk him into taking what is probably a lesser deal than he deserves, then that would be the scenario in which he comes back.
Interesting. How do you feel about Sam Jones taking over that center position? Kind of a relative unknown late round draft pick, just like Paradis, has the tools to be a solid That's center, that's specifically in his own blocking scheme from what I remember watching him at Arizona State. But, a guy that would you feel comfortable going with him day one next year?
At this point, no, but I'll tell you this, Matt McChesney, who trains a lot of these guys, raves about him and says he just needs a chance. So I don't want to be dismissive of him out of hand, but at the same time, I'd need to see it before I believe it kind of thing.
Yeah. As somebody who's a scientist, absolutely. Got to prove it.
I was born in St. Louis. That's the show me state. So
there you go. I'm wearing my St. Louis Cardinals sweatshirt right now. Don't want to insult any Rockies fans out there, but
all right. What about other guys like Jared Valdir, DAmato, Peko, some of those guys, the older guys? Are they planning on bringing any of those guys back?
Well, it just depends. If they're able to, if they need to make room to get a guy, like if that's the difference between getting CJ Mosley in free agency and not, then they'll be gone. If CJ goes a different direction and, whatever else, then they'll bring him back and go from there, probably on reduced deals. They'd like to have some flexibility with guys like that, but they understand that they're 1-year guys. So that's one of those things where, we all love Peko. He's a fan favorite. He's the nicest guy you'll ever meet. The man literally has no enemies anywhere ever. But, when all is said and done, it comes down to a cost benefit analysis. What are you getting for the cost? And is that spot hindering a younger developmental guy? So I think right now I would say Peko is probably safe. And I would say Valdir's kind of a little up in the air because they like Billy Turner. But, both those guys could be back and neither of them could be back. It's a fluid scenario.
It's those like second, third tier type of free agents where you're not sure, you don't have the money until you've already gotten those other guys signed off, or if you've got them yourself. So totally makes sense.
Yeah.
Speaking of some of these other guys, the other free agents, you mentioned CJ Mosley. Are there any blue chippers, perceived blue chippers that you would be expecting the Broncos to target? Maybe a guy like you named Adrian Amos earlier, Landon Collins, maybe a Juwan James right tackle, any of those type of upper tier free agents that you'd expect the Broncos, who look like they're going to have a fair amount of cap, to go after some of these guys?
Yeah, I would say Mosley, Amos, and James would be the three, kind of quote unquote names or blue chip guys that people would recognize. There are going to be some other guys that they'll be looking at, down trace guys from there. But I would say those are the big names to be on the lookout for.
Well, awesome. Well, that's going to wrap up this episode of Building the Broncos, powered by Overtime Media. You can find Allbright on Twitter. Make sure you do. He's got, and one of my favorite Twitter follows. He does not back down. If you say something that he does not agree with, or thinks it's BS, he will let you know, which I appreciate, because sometimes I've had to be called. Sometimes I'm saying some BS. But you can follow him on Twitter at Allbright NFL. You can follow Carl on Twitter at Carl Dumler MHH, and you can follow myself also at Nick Kendell MHH. Also, make sure you head on over to Mile High Huddle, an affiliate of 24/7 Sports and CBS Sports Digital, to find more of our content covering the Denver Broncos. Head on over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating and comment. Your support can help us continue to bring you our Denver Bronco deep dives. You can follow the Building the Broncos podcast and all our other great audio content by subscribing to the Huddle Up podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts. You can follow us on Twitter at Mile High Huddle and at BTB Football Pod. For Carl Dumler and Ben Allbright, I'm Nick Kendell, wrapping up another episode of the Building the Broncos podcast. Ben, thank you very much for coming on here. I know you're a very busy guy this time of year, and we had a little bit of technical difficulties earlier, but appreciate you coming on and spending this past nearly an hour talking football with us. A lot of good insight.
Oh, anytime, guys. Anytime.
Yeah, thanks, man.
Do you have anything that you want to promote before you get out of here?
I think you guys covered it. You can just tell them to unfollow me at Allbright NFL. Block me back, guys.
Block them back. All right. Well, we hope you guys enjoyed it, and we will see all you listeners soon. Go Broncos.
You've been listening to Building the Broncos. Join Broncos Country's deep divers at milehighhuddle.com to keep the conversation going.